Western media says America just won in the Strait of Hormuz. Eastern media says America just blinked. Both cannot be right. Stay with me because in the next few minutes, you're going to see something neither side wants you to put together. Right now, as you're watching this, over 1,550 commercial ships are stranded in the Persian Gulf. 22,500 seafarers haven't seen their families in weeks. Oil is trading above $100 a barrel. Gas prices in America just hit $4.48 per gallon. And somehow, this crisis is being reported as both a victory and a defeat simultaneously, depending on which side of the world you're watching from. That contradiction alone should make every single one of you pause, because what's happening in the Strait of Hormuz right now isn't just a military standoff, it's a battle of narratives, and whichever narrative wins shapes how this conflict ends. So at Verified Bulletin, we don't pick sides. We go where the verified facts take us. CNN's headline on May 6th reads, "Trump pauses Operation Freedom, citing great progress on Iran deal." Sounds like diplomacy winning. Sounds like both sides stepping back from the edge. Al Jazeera's framing tells a different story entirely. Their coverage emphasizes that the ceasefire was already fragile, that Iran attacked U.S. Navy and commercial vessels with cruise missiles, drones, and small boats just 24 hours before Trump announced the pause, and that Tehran is publicly calling Project Freedom a ceasefire violation. Two completely different emotional conclusions drawn from almost identical raw events. So who's right? Hold that question, because the answer comes only when you see what both of them are leaving out. Let's back up to February 28, 2026, because that's where this entire crisis ignited. On that date, the United States and Israel launched full-scale military strikes against Iran, Operation Epic Fury. Since then, major container shipping companies, including Maersk, CMA CGM, and Hapag-Lloyd, had already suspended transits through the strait and related routes. The Strait of Hormuz, which normally carries roughly 1/5 of the world's entire energy supply, was effectively sealed. Not blocked by a storm, not disrupted by an accident, sealed by a deliberate military and geopolitical calculation. That detail matters enormously for understanding everything that comes next. Around April 17th, Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi announced that the Strait of Hormuz was open to all shipping traffic, saying it would remain open for the duration of the Lebanon ceasefire. Oil prices dropped 11% almost immediately. Markets breathed. The world exhaled. But here's what Western media celebrated without digging deeper. Despite this announcement, there was no sign of implementation. Ships were again being prevented from passing through the strait. Abu Dhabi National Oil Company CEO Sultan Al Jaber confirmed that the strait was still not open because Iran was restricting and conditioning traffic. Around 230 loaded oil tankers were waiting inside the Gulf. The announcement of openness and the actual reality of openness were two entirely different things. Western media reported the announcement. Eastern media reported the tankers still sitting still. The truth was in the water, not in the press release. Subscribe to Verified Bulletin right now if you want reporting that gives you both sides and then goes past both. Hit that subscribe button because this channel exists precisely for moments like this one. On May 4, 2026, President Trump escalated dramatically. Trump launched Operation Project Freedom, a U.S. Navy mission to escort neutral ships out of the Gulf. The Iranian military immediately warned this would be a breach of the ceasefire. CNN framed it as a bold assertion of American power. Mainstream Western outlets celebrated it. Some called it historic. But read Al Jazeera's coverage from the same 24-hour window, and you get a completely different temperature in the room. Their correspondents noted that Iran had already lost track of some mines it placed in the strait, meaning the waterway's dangers were now partially self-inflicted and uncontrollable even by Tehran itself. A detail that changes the entire risk calculation. An enemy who can't even control their own weapons is more dangerous, not less. What happened next? Both sides opened fire. Iran attacked U.S. Navy and commercial ships with cruise missiles and launched drones and small boats at vessels under U.S. escort. No American ships were struck. Trump said the U.S. destroyed 8 Iranian boats. 2 U.S.-flagged merchant vessels made it through. Shipping giant Maersk confirmed one of its vehicle carriers was escorted out under U.S. military protection. Western media wrote the headline, "America Breaks Iran's Blockade."
But here's what that headline skips entirely. One transit under live fire conditions, with full military escort, after weeks of negotiation, with oil still above $100 a barrel, is not a reopened strait. That's a single crack in a dam that's still holding. Now here's where it gets genuinely fascinating, and this is the part neither side is broadcasting loudly. On May 5th, less than 24 hours after calling Project Freedom a historic display of force, Trump announced a pause on the operation, citing progress toward a complete and final agreement with Iran. He said the decision was made based on the request of Pakistan and other countries. CNN covered the pause as strategic patience. Al Jazeera covered it as evidence that the military pressure had limits. But what both left out is the real geopolitical chess happening underneath. Pakistan brokering this pause means a non-NATO, nuclear-armed Muslim-majority country is now sitting at the center of one of the most consequential negotiations of 2026. That's not a footnote. That's a tectonic shift in who gets a seat at the table when America and Iran fight. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said Tuesday that the original combat operation, Epic Fury, is now over. The operation is over. We achieved the objectives of that operation, he said. Trump, however, has not ruled out resuming a bombing campaign if negotiations collapse or Iran breaks the ceasefire. Read that twice. The combat operation is over, but the threat of a new one is alive. That's not peace. That's a loaded gun with the safety on, and the clock is ticking. Drop a comment right now. Do you think Iran comes to the table, or does this escalate again within 30 days? Thousands of you are watching this. Your read on this matters. Comment below. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi was visiting Beijing while all of this unfolded inside the strait. That visit is almost completely absent from American mainstream coverage. But think about what that means. China receives roughly a third of its oil through the Strait of Hormuz. A third. If you're Tehran and you want leverage, you don't just threaten Washington, you walk into Beijing and remind them what's at stake for their entire economy. Iran isn't as isolated as Western reporting suggests, and China isn't as silent as American audiences believe. Rubio urged China to directly convey to Iran's foreign minister that continued hostility in the waterway would cause Tehran to be globally isolated. America asking China to deliver a message to Iran. Think about that sentence. That's not dominance. That's diplomacy through a back channel with a rival superpower. The very framing of global isolation falls apart when the country you're calling isolated is holding meetings in Beijing while the U.S. Secretary of State is asking China to be the messenger. Here's the verified economic picture that should concern every single person watching this. The closure of the strait has disrupted global trade, causing oil and fertilizer prices to soar and prompting fears of a global recession and a food emergency. Fertilizer prices. Most people watching Geopolitics miss that entirely. Fertilizer prices mean food prices. Food prices mean instability in countries that have nothing to do with this conflict. The 2011 Arab Spring was partially triggered by food price spikes. History doesn't repeat, but it rhymes loudly. Oil prices retreated slightly after the pause announcement, but remained well above $100 a barrel. The average U.S. gas price climbed slightly to $4.48 a gallon. That number sits in the wallets of ordinary families everywhere, from Asia to Europe to South America. Every extra dollar at the pump is a direct consequence of decisions being made in a 34-kilometer-wide stretch of water between Iran and Oman. The strait is 34 kilometers wide at its narrowest point, forming a seaway passage that facilitates the transit of around 20 million barrels of oil per day,
representing roughly 20% of global seaborne oil trade. 20% of the entire world's seaborne oil, through a gap narrower than some cities. And right now, a ceasefire so fragile that one miscalculation could end it is the only thing keeping that gap from turning into an inferno. What's the reality both narratives are dancing around? Iran's position is weaker militarily than it was in February. 8 fast attack boats destroyed. Air defenses degraded by U.S. and Israeli strikes in prior months. Nuclear facilities hit. But Iran's negotiating position is not zero.
Tehran still controls something no military strike can immediately eliminate, which is the geography itself. Mines, coastal missiles, fast boats, and asymmetric tactics work in a 34-kilometer channel in a way they never could on open ocean. And as long as Iran can credibly threaten the strait, even a weakened Iran has leverage. That's the truth neither CNN nor Al Jazeera puts in the headline. Trump paused Project Freedom. He did not end the naval blockade on Iranian ports. More than 1,500 commercial ships are still waiting to get through Iran's closure of the critical waterway. The blockade keeps the economic pressure on Tehran. The pause on escort operations gives diplomacy a window. Pakistan is holding the pen. China is holding the phone. Iran's foreign minister is in Beijing, and Trump is watching from Truth Social, ready to restart everything if the window closes. That's not a resolved situation. That's a negotiation with bombs parked just outside the door. If this video helped you see beyond the headline, smash that like button right now. It tells YouTube to push this analysis to more people who deserve to see verified, unfiltered reporting. And if you're new here, Verified Bulletin is where we strip away the spin and give you what the data actually says. So what comes next? 3 scenarios are genuinely on the table right now. 1. Iran and the U.S. reach a framework agreement through Pakistan's mediation. The blockade partially lifts, oil stabilizes, and this becomes one of the strangest non-war wars in modern history. 2. Negotiations collapse. Trump restarts escort operations, Iran retaliates, and the ceasefire dies. 3. Something nobody is discussing openly. China, watching its oil supply and its Belt and Road investments in the region hang in the balance, quietly pressures both sides into a deal that looks like American success, but is actually shaped in Beijing. Scenario 3 is the one nobody in Western media wants to name out loud because it shifts the narrative of who actually controls the end game. Stay locked in on this story because the next 72 hours matter enormously. The pause is temporary by Trump's own words. The blockade never lifted. Iran's foreign minister is in China right now, and 22,500 sailors are still waiting to go home. Subscribe to Verified Bulletin because when this story breaks again, and it will break again, you want to be the one in the room who already knows the full picture. Hit the notification bell. Share this video with one person who still thinks this is a simple American victory story. It isn't simple. Nothing in Hormuz ever is.